What if I told you that two brothers who vanished during one of Florida's most devastating wildfires in 2021 weren't actually victims of the flames? What if their disappearance was part of something far more sinister? And the truth only came to light when a shipping container, buried deep in the Everglades, was discovered by pure chance 4 years later. This is the story of Marcus and Daniel Rivera, two brothers whose fate remained a mystery until a construction crew made a discovery that would unravel one of the most shocking conspiracies in Florida's recent history. It was August 15th, 2021, when the Palmetto Wildfire erupted in the dense forests of central Florida, near the small town of Brooksville. What started as a small brush fire quickly escalated into a raging inferno that would consume over 50 acres of pristine wilderness and threaten hundreds of homes. The fire moved with terrifying speed, fueled by drought conditions and fierce winds that seemed to change direction without warning. Marcus Rivera, 34, and his younger brother Daniel, 28, were experienced outdoorsmen who had spent their entire lives exploring Florida's wilderness. Marcus worked as a wildlife photographer for National Geographic, while Daniel was a survival instructor who ran wilderness training courses for corporate groups and military personnel. The brothers were inseparable, sharing not only their love for nature, but also an almost supernatural ability to navigate even the most challenging terrain. On the morning the Palmetto Wildfire began, the Rivera brothers had been deep in the forest, approximately 15 miles from the nearest road, conducting a photography expedition for Marcus's upcoming book about Florida's endangered ecosystems. They had been camping in the area for 3 days, documenting rare bird species and capturing images of the untouched wilderness that few people ever had the chance to see. When the fire started, the brothers should have had plenty of time to evacuate. They were experienced enough to recognize the signs of an approaching wildfire, and they had multiple escape routes planned. Their campsite was equipped with satellite communication devices, GPS units, and enough supplies to last for weeks if necessary. These weren't inexperienced hikers who might panic in an emergency. They were professionals who had survived countless dangerous situations in some of the world's most remote locations. The last confirmed contact with the Rivera brothers came at 11:47 a.m. on August 15th, when Marcus sent a text message to their sister, Elena, saying they were aware of the fire and were beginning their evacuation. The message was brief but confident. Fire spotted to the west. We're moving to Extraction Point Alpha. Should be out by evening. Don't worry. That was the last anyone ever heard from Marcus and Daniel Rivera. When the brothers failed to arrive at their planned extraction point that evening, Elena immediately contacted the authorities. She knew her brothers well enough to understand that they would never miss a scheduled check-in unless something was seriously wrong. The Hernando County Sheriff's Department initially advised her to wait until morning, suggesting that the brothers might have been delayed by the fire and were simply taking shelter until it was safe to move. But Elena Rivera wasn't satisfied with that explanation. She knew her brothers' capabilities and their meticulous planning. She drove through the night to reach the area where they had been camping, arriving at the Forest Service road that served as their usual extraction point just as dawn was breaking on August 16th. What she found there would haunt her for the next 4 years. The brothers' pickup truck was exactly where it was supposed to be, parked at the end of the Forest Service road, with their keys still in the ignition. Their wallets, cell phones, and identification were locked in the glove compartment, just as they always did when heading into the wilderness to prevent losing important items. But Marcus and Daniel were nowhere to be found, and there was no sign that they had ever returned to their vehicle. The search and rescue operation that followed was one of the largest in Florida's history. Hundreds of volunteers joined professional search teams, Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras scoured the burned landscape, and search dogs were brought in from across the state. The search was complicated by the fact that the wildfire was still active, making many areas inaccessible to ground teams. Captain Sarah Mitchell, who led the search operation, later described it as one of the most challenging cases of her career. "We had two highly experienced outdoorsmen who simply vanished without a trace," she explained. "Their truck was where it should be. Their equipment was accounted for. But there was absolutely no sign of what had happened to them. It was as if they had just evaporated." The search teams found the brothers' campsite 3 days after they were reported missing. The area had been partially burned by the wildfire, but enough remained to piece together what had happened in their final hours. Their tent was still standing, though damaged by heat and smoke. Their photography equipment was neatly packed and ready for transport, suggesting they had indeed begun preparations to evacuate. What puzzled the investigators was the discovery of the brothers' hiking boots, found neatly placed outside their tent as if they had removed them before going to sleep. But their other gear, backpacks, water bottles, and emergency supplies, was missing. It appeared they had left their campsite on foot, but without their boots, which made no sense for experienced outdoorsmen who would never venture into rough terrain barefoot. Dr. James Patterson, a forensic anthropologist brought in to assist with the investigation, examined the campsite extensively. He found no signs of struggle, no blood, and no indication that the brothers had been attacked by wildlife or fallen victim to any kind of accident. Everything at the campsite suggested a normal evacuation, Dr. Patterson noted. But the missing boots and the fact that we found no trace of their path out of the area raised serious questions about what really happened. The official investigation continued for 6 months. But as the weeks turned into months without any new leads, the case gradually moved from active investigation to cold case status. The prevailing theory was that the brothers had become disoriented in the smoke and confusion of the wildfire and had perished in an area that was too badly burned for their remains to be recovered. Elena Rivera never accepted this explanation. She hired private investigators, organized her own search parties, and spent thousands of dollars on aerial surveys of the burned areas. She was convinced that her brothers were too experienced and too careful to simply get lost and die in a wildfire. Marcus and Daniel could navigate by the stars if they had to, she told reporters. They had backup plans for their backup plans. Something else happened to them. And I'm going to find out what. As the months passed, Elena's investigation began to uncover disturbing information about the area where her brothers had disappeared. She learned that the region had been the subject of several environmental disputes in recent years, with various corporate interests seeking to develop parts of the protected wilderness for mining and logging operations. There had been heated conflicts between environmental groups and development companies, with some activists receiving threats and harassment. Elena discovered that Marcus had been working on more than just a photography book. In the months before his disappearance, he had been investigating illegal dumping and environmental crimes in Florida's wilderness areas. His camera equipment, which was never found despite extensive searches, had contained thousands of photographs documenting various environmental violations. Elena found emails on Marcus's computer showing that he had been in contact with federal environmental investigators and was planning to provide evidence of several major crimes. This revelation changed the entire complexion of the case. What had initially appeared to be a tragic accident during a natural disaster now looked like it might be something far more sinister. Elena shared her findings with the FBI, and the case was reopened as a potential homicide investigation in early 2022. Special Agent Robert Chen, who took over the federal investigation, approached the case with fresh eyes and new resources. He assembled a team that included environmental crime specialists, digital forensics experts, and analysts who specialized in corporate crime. What they discovered was a web of corruption and environmental crime that reached into some of Florida's most powerful corporate boardrooms. The investigation revealed that Marcus Rivera had stumbled upon evidence of a massive illegal dumping operation that had been going on for years in the protected wilderness areas of Central Florida. Corporate waste disposal companies had been secretly dumping toxic materials in remote areas of the forest, paying bribes to local officials to look the other way and using the vast, inaccessible wilderness as their personal dumping ground. Agent Chen's team discovered that Marcus had photographed several illegal dump sites and had documented the license plates of trucks involved in the operation. He had also captured images of corporate executives and local officials who were directly involved in the scheme. The photographs Marcus had taken in the weeks before his disappearance would have been enough to bring down the entire operation and send dozens of people to prison. But despite this breakthrough in understanding the motive for the brothers' disappearance, the investigation still lacked physical evidence of what had actually happened to Marcus and Daniel. The illegal dumping sites had been cleaned up and abandoned after the wildfire, and the perpetrators had covered their tracks well. Agent Chen knew that without bodies or concrete evidence of foul play, it would be nearly impossible to bring charges against anyone. The case might have remained unsolved indefinitely, if not for a completely unrelated construction project that began in the summer of 2025. The Florida Department of Transportation had contracted with Meridian Construction Company to build a new section of highway that would connect two existing roads and provide better access to the rebuilt areas that had been damaged by the unquote 2021 wildfire. The construction required extensive excavation through a remote area of the Everglades, about 30 miles from where the Rivera brothers had disappeared. The work was routine until July 18th, 2025, when a construction crew operating a large excavator struck something metallic buried about 8 feet underground. Initially, the workers assumed they had hit an old pipe or septic tank, but as they carefully excavated around the object, they realized they had found something much more significant. What they had discovered was a large shipping container, approximately 20 feet long and 8 feet wide, that had been deliberately buried in the swampy ground. The container was sealed and showed signs of having been underground for several years. The construction foreman, Mike Rodriguez, immediately stopped work and contacted the authorities, recognizing that the buried container was highly unusual and potentially connected to criminal activity. Sheriff's deputies arrived at the construction site within an hour, followed shortly by FBI agents who had been monitoring any developments that might be related to the Rivera brothers' case. Agent Chen was among the first federal investigators to arrive at the scene, and he immediately recognized the potential significance of the discovery. The process of safely excavating and opening the container took nearly 2 days. The container was carefully lifted from the ground using heavy machinery and transported to a secure facility where it could be opened under controlled conditions. The anticipation among the investigators was intense. They all hoped that the container might finally provide the answers they had been seeking for 4 years. When the container was finally opened on July 20th, 2025, what the investigators found inside exceeded their worst fears and confirmed their suspicions about the fate of Marcus and Daniel Rivera. The container had been converted into a makeshift laboratory and disposal facility, complete with chemical storage tanks, industrial equipment, and most horrifically, human remains. The remains found in the container were later identified through DNA analysis as belonging to Marcus and Daniel Rivera. But the condition of the remains and the other evidence found in the container told a story that was far more disturbing than a simple murder. The brothers had been kidnapped, held captive, and subjected to torture and interrogation before finally being killed. The container also contained extensive documentation of the illegal dumping operation that Marcus had been investigating. There were financial records, correspondence between corporate executives and corrupt officials, and detailed maps showing dozens of illegal dump sites throughout Florida's wilderness areas. Most damning of all, there were audio recordings of conversations in which the participants discussed the problem of Marcus Rivera and the need to eliminate the threat he posed to their operation. Dr. Lisa Thompson, the forensic pathologist who examined the remains, determined that the brothers had been held captive for several days before being killed. The evidence suggested that their captors had tortured them in an attempt to learn what evidence Marcus had gathered and who else might know about the illegal dumping operation. The brothers had apparently refused to cooperate, leading to their eventual murder. The discovery of the container and its contents led to the largest environmental crime investigation in Florida's history. Within weeks of the discovery, federal agents had arrested over 30 individuals, including corporate executives, local government officials, and members of an organized crime syndicate that had been facilitating the illegal dumping operation. The investigation revealed that the illegal dumping scheme had been operating for over a decade and had generated hundreds of millions of dollars in illegal profits. The environmental damage caused by the dumping was catastrophic, with toxic chemicals contaminating groundwater and soil across thousands of acres of protected wilderness. The cleanup costs were estimated to exceed $1 billion. Thomas Brennan, the CEO of Apex Waste Management, was identified as the mastermind behind the operation. Brennan had built his company into one of Florida's largest waste disposal firms by dramatically undercutting his competitors' prices. What his customers didn't know was that instead of properly disposing of their toxic waste at licensed facilities, Brennan was simply dumping it in remote areas of Florida's wilderness. The audio recordings found in the container revealed that Brennan had personally ordered the kidnapping and murder of the Rivera brothers. In one particularly chilling recording, Brennan could be heard saying, "That photographer is going to destroy everything we've built. We can't let him walk away from this. Do whatever it takes to stop him." The trial of Thomas Brennan and his co-conspirators began in March 2026 and lasted for 6 months. The evidence against them was overwhelming, including the audio recordings, financial documents, and testimony from several participants who had agreed to cooperate with the prosecution in exchange for reduced sentences. Elena Rivera testified at the trial, describing the 4-year nightmare of not knowing what had happened to her brothers and the relief of finally learning the truth. Despite its horrific nature, Marcus and Daniel died because they were trying to protect the environment they loved. She said in her victim impact statement, "They were murdered by people who cared more about money than about the natural world or human life." The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all charges. Thomas Brennan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murders of Marcus and Daniel Rivera, plus an additional 50 years for environmental crimes and racketeering. His co-conspirators received sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years in prison. The discovery of the container and the subsequent investigation also led to significant changes in how environmental crimes are investigated and prosecuted in Florida. New laws were passed requiring more stringent oversight of waste disposal companies, and additional resources were allocated to environmental crime units within law enforcement agencies. A memorial fund was established in honor of Marcus and Daniel Rivera to support environmental protection efforts and wilderness conservation in Florida. The fund has provided grants to environmental organizations, supported the training of environmental crime investigators, and helped finance the cleanup of areas damaged by illegal dumping. The area where the brothers had been camping was eventually designated as the Rivera Brothers Wilderness Preserve, ensuring that the land they died trying to protect would remain untouched for future generations. A simple monument at the preserve's entrance bears the inscription, "In memory of Marcus and Daniel Rivera, who gave their lives defending the natural world they loved." The case of the Rivera brothers serves as a stark reminder of the lengths to which some individuals will go to protect their illegal profits, and the courage required to stand up against environmental crime. Their story also highlights the importance of environmental protection and the need for continued vigilance against those who would exploit and destroy our natural resources for personal gain. Agent Chen, who led the investigation that finally brought the brothers' killers to justice, reflected on the case in a later interview. Marcus and Daniel Rivera were heroes who died trying to expose environmental crimes that were causing irreparable damage to Florida's wilderness. Their sacrifice wasn't in vain. The investigation that followed their murders led to the cleanup of dozens of contaminated sites and the prosecution of one of the largest environmental crime syndicates in the state's history. The shipping container that had held the brothers' remains and the evidence that brought down their killers was eventually destroyed. But not before every piece of evidence it contained was carefully documented and preserved. The container had been a tomb for Marcus and Daniel Rivera, but it ultimately became the key that unlocked the truth about their fate and brought justice for their murders. Today, the Rivera Brothers Wilderness Preserve stands as a living memorial to two men who loved the natural world enough to die defending it. Visitors to the preserve can hike the same trails that Marcus and Daniel once explored, photograph the same wildlife they had documented, and experience the pristine wilderness that they gave their lives to protect. The story of Marcus and Daniel Rivera reminds us that environmental crime is not a victimless offense, and that those who seek to expose and stop such crimes often face serious personal risks. Their courage in the face of danger, and their ultimate sacrifice helped ensure that one of Florida's most destructive environmental crime operations was finally brought to an end. The wildfire that had initially been blamed for the brothers' disappearance had actually provided the perfect cover for their murder, allowing their killers to operate without suspicion for 4 years. But in the end, the truth could not remain buried forever, and the shipping container that was meant to hide their crimes forever became the instrument of justice that brought their killers to account.